that are not suitable for some audiences. Viewer discretion is advised.
Good evening, I'm Hugh Downs.
And I'm Barbara Walters, and this is 2020.
On the ABC News Magazine, 2020 with Hugh Downs and Barbara Walters. Tonight, the cult Children of God. Founded by Moses David Berg, he reportedly sanctioned sex among children.
I practice what I preach. And I preach sex, boys and girls, hallelujah.
To win converts, women members entice total strangers.
Only the flirting was more than flirting. It was actually, religious prostitution.
Bizarre? This woman thought so. It's why she left Children of God. But while she escaped, her 4 children remained in the cult.
Hey, 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 hallelujah, hey, hey, hey.
In Thailand, their father determined to keep them.
I can't sit back and let that happen.
But how could she find them half a world away? Tonight, the cult, the search, and a searing climax.
I don't want to go back to America. I want to see you, Thailand.
Tom Gerald tells of a mother's quest to bring her children home.
Tonight, an extraordinary account of a mother's struggle to save her children from a cult in Thailand. Now, you may never have heard of the Children of God, but it's out there. In public, members constantly invoke the name of Jesus, but in private, they reportedly see child sex and incest as part of their gospel.
We received word of the mother's plight from the offices of South Dakota Senator Larry Pressler. What at first had the sound of a custody battle became much more than who gets the children. Possibly at stake were matters of sexual abuse and mind control. Tom Jarrell has a startling 2-part report that's been nearly 6 months in the making.
Vivian Shalanda is 35 years old. She lives in Sioux Falls, South Dakota. A year ago, Vivian appeared to be a typical American woman, going through a routine day, caring for her 4-year-old son, Yancha. But if you looked closer, you'd have seen that her life was in shambles. She was an emotional wreck because her 4 other children, John, April, Caleb, and Tito, were trapped and had been for their entire lives in a destructive cult called the Children of God. Vivian believed, though she wasn't certain, that they were living halfway around the world in Bangkok, Thailand, with their father, Richard, who's also a member of the cult. She had not seen her children for over 3 years. Heartbroken, she desperately wanted them back.
I've made it a cause and a purpose in my life to get my children out of that organization. When you know that something is wrong, you can't sit back and let your children live that. I mean, to never know anything else. I can't sit back and let that happen.
Vivian herself was a member of the cult for 13 years, and during that time, all of her children were born. A few years ago, she escaped with her youngest, Yancha. Later, she became driven to get the other children out because she understood the abusive practices of the cult which she had abandoned. The Children of God was started in 1968 in California by this man, Moses David Berg. Years later, ex-members would call him demonic, evil, psychotic. But in the beginning, everything seemed very innocent. Berg preached to the hippie generation about Jesus and recruited them to join him in his all-consuming drive to save souls. Berg's entire family belonged, including his youngest daughter, Faith.
We're just going to get out there and sing and dance and give testimonies and show them the love of Jesus.
Today, 20 years later, the cult continues to operate. Members estimated in the thousands live all over the world in communal houses. Berg himself keeps his whereabouts a secret, but he manages to maintain strict obedience from his followers through a series of commandments written in so-called Mo letters. But what's most striking about the cult is Berg's philosophy when it comes to sex.
I practice what I preach, and I preach sex, boys and girls, hallelujah.
In 1973, Berg introduced a practice he calls flirty fishing. His older daughter, Deborah, who left the cult in the late 70s, explains the term.
Well, my dad got the terminology from fishing, what Jesus said in the Bible, to go out and fish for men. And so she was going to use the women to fish for the men, to bring the men to the kingdom of God through flirting. Only the flirting was more than flirting. It was actually, you know, religious prostitution.
For Vivian, practices like flirty fishing made her doubt her commitment to the cult.
I don't care how many scriptures Moses David came up with, you know, justifying it. When I read it personally, it didn't say that to me.
A Children of God spokesman claims they stopped flirty fishing about a year ago, in part because of the spread of AIDS. But the practice, very disturbing to Vivian, was in full swing when she was a member of the cult. And even more alarming to Vivian were Berg's sexual doctrines involving children, the very age of her own.
God created boys and girls able to have children by about the age of 12 years of age. My God, now he's going to advocate childhood sex. He's going to advocate child brides. Yes.
In fact, this Children of God publication has a chapter called My Little Fish, which shows photos of children in suggestive poses. Here the caption reads, "That come hither look." There are also photos of children together and with adults.
Is there a mole writing, thou shalt conduct incest?
His writings point to it. Yes, they do. He has writings where he has definitely said it's okay.
According to Berg's daughter, Deborah, Berg himself has had an incestuous relationship with his other daughter, Faith, for years, although they both deny that's the case. In fact, a spokesman for Berg told 2020 that he does not advocate incest. Yet Deborah claims her father did approach her for sex, and that was the catalyst to her leaving the cult.
My dad was just an evil personality that was not hearing from God at all. I had to quit looking at him as the man as my father, but as a leader of a worldwide movement who was destroying people's lives.
The same destructive forces drove Vivian out of the Children of God. July 1984 was her turning point. She left Bangkok, Thailand, where she had been living with her husband, Richard, and their 5 children, and she returned to Sioux Falls with only the baby. The cult leader, she said, wouldn't let her take the others. Reportedly, keeping children is a cult policy. While longing for her 4 lost children, Vivian lived here in this small apartment in Sioux Falls, disoriented, unable to hold a job, and subsisting on welfare.
How did it affect your daily life when you thought you might not get them back?
Oh, I wanted to die.
Halfway around the world in Thailand, the children continued to live the lives of cult members. They were programmed to perform on the streets to bring in new converts, and they often traveled to refugee camps along the Thai-Cambodian border with their father, Richard.
Thank you, Lord. Thank you, Jesus.
Incredibly, the children sometimes perform before crowds of refugees.
Hey, 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 hallelujah, hey, hey, hey.
Although they were far away, they were never forgotten by their mother, who finally in December of 1986, after nearly 3 years of recovery from the harmful effects of the cult, decides she's ready to go after her children. The task seems overwhelming, but she's determined to try. As her plan unfolds, each step is crucial for its success. June 1987, Vivian hires Mike Entravia, a private investigator, to head up the operation. September 87, she joins the First Baptist Church of Sioux Falls and makes an emotional appeal to the entire congregation for help. They agree to take on the cause, eventually helping to arrange over $25,000 in loans to help fund the investigation.
What compelled you to help her? You must have a lot of people that come by wanting help.
Not very many of them have quite the same kind of story.
November 1987, Vivian is granted temporary custody of her children. This is crucial because without this court ruling, the investigator, Mike Entravia, will not carry out the operation. But now with all systems go, the operation shifts to Bangkok, Thailand, on the other side of the world. By mid-January 1988, Vivian, Mike, and his assistant, Scott Biondo, are all there. The search is underway. Mike and Scott spend long, exhausting days looking for the children, but with no results. The investigation is adrift, and Vivian's confidence is shattered.
Can you imagine 3.5 years just waiting? I mean, I have cried. I've really agonized. I could try to say it's a hopeless cause, just leave them where they are. I can't do that.
Desperate, Vivian and the investigators decide to focus entirely on the Thai Immigration Department. On January 28th, the children's father, Richard, has an appointment here to renew his visa. Yet there's absolutely no certainty he'll show up, because if he doesn't, there's no serious penalty. A long shot? Yes. Still, this looks like their only hope. So Mike and Scott meet with immigration officials. They agree to help as long as their identities are protected. An unofficial deal is struck. If they learn of the address of the father, they'll tip Mike off. It's now Wednesday, January 27th, the day before the big gamble.
My feelings about tomorrow is, first of all, yes, it is a big day, and hopefully it will be that big day. It will be the day where everything goes down and everything goes down smoothly.
Later, the three meet for a last-minute planning session where Mike describes the possibilities for the following day. For instance, what if Richard comes into immigration with the children? Or what if he doesn't show up at all? Or
Richard comes in without the children.
All right.
Okay, which is probably going to be the greatest likelihood. They will require him then to bring the children in that day, and we'll come in and recover the children. And
Vivian is warned to expect resistance.
Be prepared that the kids may not want to go. You don't really know what they've been told over the past years. And what I'm really getting at is your emotions. Try not to let it really hurt you. Okay.
Mike then places a very tough decision in Vivian's lap. What if Richard shows up at immigration, but with only one or two of the four kids? Does she want Mike to seize those children on the spot and hope eventually to find the others? Or does she want the officials to bluff Richard and tell him to return the next day, hoping he and the kids won't vanish, never to be located again?
It's a hard decision, and you know, you're going to need to think about it, and just tell me tomorrow morning.
Faced with a decision no parent would want to make, deeply torn, Vivian holds off.
To me, it's a terrible choice to have to not get all the children. My purpose in this whole thing is to be successful. I want them delivered from an organization that is destructive.
Thursday, January 28th, 1988. It's just before dawn in Bangkok, Thailand. While the Buddhist monks receive their morning meal, across town, Vivian Shalanda prepares for the biggest day of her life. After 3.5 years of separation from her children, today she will either rescue them from a cult or perhaps lose them forever. It's a day filled with awesome possibilities.
I'm very nervous. I just feel like the bottom is going to fall out if something doesn't go my way.
By 8 a.m. at the immigration office, everyone's in place. Mike is stationed inside with the officials. Scott remains outside, and Vivian is hidden in this van in the parking lot. She sits behind tinted windows so she can see out, but Richard, should he appear, will not be able to see in. Now it's decision time. Mike slips away from his post to press Vivian for an answer to her excruciating dilemma. What should be the plan of action if Richard does come in, but with only one or two of the children?
I don't know what to do. Tell me, Mike. Give me your advice.
I think we should just take the child or children that come in with them and take the information and hit the streets today and find the other ones.
I see. Okay.
Reluctantly, she tells Mike to get back as many of the children as he can, even if it's not all four of them. Mike then returns to the immigration office while Vivian keeps her vigil. Hours are passing. 11 o'clock. 12 noon comes and goes, and there's no sign of Richard Shalanda.
I'm really hoping that this all really isn't a waste, and I hope in the ultimate end that it's going to be fruitful. It's going to be worth it all.
More time slips away. The immigration office closes at 4:30, only a few hours away. Vivian keeps her eyes riveted to the entrance of the building, hoping against hope. Unbelievably, at 3 p.m., Richard appears without the children. He's quickly sent to the immigration officials.
What happened? What happened? Oh my, they told him to go downstairs. Look out.
Mike makes a trip to the van to let Vivian know what's going on.
They're going to require him to tell where exactly he lives. They're going to make him take the Thai immigration people to the house and show him where they're living so they can verify the address and the children's presence. Now it's a waiting game. we're just going to have to wait and see and hope everything goes well.
Within minutes, the immigration official orders Richard to take him to the cult home on the outskirts of Bangkok. Mike goes along so he can see for himself if the children are really there. But he leaves strict instructions that Vivian and Scott are to remain in the van. At this point in the game, they're winging it. Every step is unpredictable. For the moment, Vivian's fears about seeing her children outweigh the excitement.
I guess I'm going to be a little bit afraid that they might reject me. I'm afraid that it's going to be a little bit difficult for me to turn their hearts to their mother.
Scott and Vivian wait in the van for what seems like an eternity. The immigration office closes and the parking lot begins to empty. They have no idea what's happening. But then a man with a message arrives.
900343.
Yes.
Okay, call that number. Call, telephone.
Yes, yes.
That number.
To Mr. Wolof.
I will call.
Moments later, Scott returns with big news.
Okay, just relax, okay? Just relax. They've already got the children. They have the children. They're at the Ambassador Hotel. We're on our way, okay? Just relax.
You think they only have 2?
I don't know. They said the children. You know, I really don't know right now.
Vivian and Scott quickly make their way along the Bangkok highways. Little do they know that Mike has corralled the kids into a van and is holding the father at bay with a fistful of U.S. legal papers, not necessarily valid in Thailand. Finally, Vivian and Scott arrive at the Ambassador Hotel. Tense, overwhelmed, Vivian approaches her children, all 4 of them.
Hi, kids.
I don't even know you.
That's okay.
Who is this?
Mama loves you, and you guys don't worry. I'm your mother.
Their father, Richard, and his common-law wife watch stunned as Vivian boldly moves in to take the children.
I'm going to take you guys home with me for a while. All right, you go away.
Who do you guys love?
You go away.
Daddy!
They love the Lord, okay?
Who is this, you guys? Do we know her? Did she leave you 4 years ago? She left.
You kids don't worry. You trust the Lord.
Who do you want to stay with?
The children don't want to go. They consider their mother an enemy because she left the cult.
I don't want to go back to America. I want to see you, Thailand.
Hey, kids,
You're going to understand. Where are the
we'll
papers?
We'll work this out later. Let's go, you guys.
Mike,
we're staying here.
No, you're not. You kids are not going anywhere.
Okay.
You have a copy.
She has them.
He has to take them or whatever.
These are all on hit for him?
Well, some of them are.
You want to stay with Mom, Daddy? No, Mommy will never be happy with you. You will never go. I only want us to be happy. You let us stay with Daddy. If you love us, please let us stay with Daddy.
They don't need more time with him at all. He's going to deceive you the same as he's deceived you all along.
Yeah, you're not.
We need to go. Who's going to be with the children?
You and Scott.
Daddy, will we see you again?
Can I pray before you go?
Yes, Daddy.
Let's just say a prayer.
Come back to
Okay, let's pray. Let's say a prayer. Thank you, Jesus. Thank you, Lord. Thank you, Jesus.
We'll pray. I'll pray with him, Richard. You go away. I know the Lord. I will. I will pray with him. You go away. I will pray with the children. Lord, in Jesus' name, Lord, I ask you to take the fear away from these children, Lord.
No, you're not. You're not going. You're not going with us. Go. Go. Let's go.
Why not? Why not?
She has legal custody. Let's go.
Oh, come on, that is not true. She left him for 4 years. Come on, I tell you, that is not fair to do that.
You go away.
He's been the best daddy in the world. You've been the worst mommy in the world.
I was never allowed to be your mother. I was never allowed to be your mother.
They head off into Bangkok's rush hour traffic to a hotel where they can hide for the night, not knowing how Richard or the cult might react next. Mike immediately begins to make arrangements to get out of the country as soon as possible. Down the hall, the kids seem surprisingly calm, playing games with 2 of Vivian's friends who are here to help. For Vivian, who's taking her first delicate steps to rekindle the ties with her children, this is a day beyond belief.
I'm just totally shocked and overwhelmed. I had no idea I was going to be sitting with those children tonight. It's a miraculous day.
But beneath this harmonious picture, these kids are grappling with some of their deepest emotions.
I really miss my daddy, and
This is Tito.
I don't want him to feel lonely in Thailand.
Yeah.
But I'm glad to see my mommy again. I'm really glad I can spend some time with her again, too.
April.
Like, I'd like to stay in Thailand. That's what I want to do. But I won't fight it if I have to go to America.
Caleb.
I'd rather stay in Thailand.
John.
Well, I feel it as if it was the worst day in my life. And I don't exactly appreciate my mom coming back at a time like this.
Outside the room, a guard is posted around the clock. As long as the children remain in Bangkok, Mike fears they're vulnerable to being snatched back by the children of God and their father, Richard.
And you say, am I going to get them back? I think I will. I think the Lord is going to touch somebody's heart, and they're going to win someone's heart. And he's going to do a miracle.
Things are just, they're really risky. Yes, they are. We need to go. We need to get out.
Monday, February 1st. After 2 days of hassling with red tape, they're free to go. If they don't hurry, they'll miss the last flight out for the day.
Couldn't have strung this whole thing out any farther. We're down to absolutely seconds right now.
Tito seems lost in his thoughts perhaps of his father and of the sudden transformation his life is going through. That transformation escalates as they take off on Thai Air Flight 661 at 3:45 p.m. As they speed through over 8,000 miles of airspace, people on the other side of the world in Sioux Falls are preparing for their arrival.
What was your first response when you learned Vivian had the children and she'd be coming back?
Hallelujah. First response. Second response, now the work begins.
The work is underway. Volunteer Barbara Cumble is selecting coats for the kids.
This one will fit Tito. A cream of mushroom is a good hot dish.
Other volunteers shop for groceries they'll take here to Vivian's new home, a 4-bedroom low-income townhouse arranged for by church members. For Yancha, Vivian's youngest, who's been separated from his mother now for weeks, this is a happy time.
Be sure you bring it tomorrow to the airplane.
Tuesday, February 2nd. There's a feeling of celebration at the airport.
Is anybody coming in?
No.
As soon as the plane does touch down, Yancha is glued to the window, waiting for his mother to appear. The crowd watches with him with intense anticipation.
Look, John, look, there's your mom in the green sweater. See her?
Welcome home. All right. Glad you're here.
Vivian is astounded to be back in Sioux Falls with the children she thought she had lost forever.
It just shows me they're my children. They're my children. They're part of my flesh. They're part of me. And that's something no one could ever take away from me.
The children seem to be enjoying all the fuss and festivities swirling about them. But there are moments when their deep bitterness emerges.
If your mom comes and takes you away from your dad by force, brings you to a country you don't even like, then what are you supposed to feel like?
As she walks into the bitter cold, Vivian is wondering exactly what it will take for her children to make the monumental adjustment that's before them. It's too early to know.
Ready, go!
Tuesday, February 16th, 2 weeks after their arrival in Sioux Falls, we visit the Shalanda family to see how they're doing. They look like they're having a great time.
Okay, we're gonna push. Let's go.
But beneath this sparkle, there's serious trouble. The kids still speak adamantly of their wish to return to the children of God. They refuse to go to school because they say it's against the cult's doctrine. And they fight frequently with their mother, most often because she no longer believes in the cult leader, Moses David Berg.
When she questions what he says, where does that leave her?
That leaves her on the junk pile.
Junk pile?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
These children, devoted to the cult, know all about its practices, including the religious prostitution, which until last year was advocated by Berg to win new disciples.
John, in terms of flirty fishing, do you think it works? Is it a good idea?
Yes, I've heard of about 100 of our converts were won over flirty fishing.
One of the only ways to get into their heart and to really show them the real love of God was to get in bed with them and to really share their hearts with them.
And April, do you think as you got older you would have been asked to do flirty fishing?
Of course not. You volunteer to.
And would you do it?
Of course.
To bring someone in, to make another believer, it's worth it to you?
Yes.
Of course, not only did April's religious leader advocate this practice, so does her own father.
No, what about flirty fishing?
Yeah.
Tell me about flirty fishing.
Well, it's nothing new. It's something that God has been trying to get his love across to men for thousands of years. And we feel that if manufacturers of automobiles and motorcycles can use sex as advertising, then why can't God use sex? Then what's wrong with sex?
2020 also asked Richard about My Little Fish. That's the chapter in the cult publication which shows children in sexual poses with each other and with adults.
It's just a piece of educational material, and we've learned many things through the years of child care, taking care of children. It's actually fun to watch a child, in this case, experience life.
Dr. Margaret Singer is a psychologist and cult expert.
How does that strike you as a statement from a father?
What he was saying, experience life, shows a mother orally copulating a little boy, and that's his opinion about what would usually in the United States be regarded as sexual abuse of a child.
Richard says there's never been any sexual abuse of children in his home.
It's something that we forbid in our homes. It's something that has never been practiced nor advocated, and I stand here before you telling the truth.
The children do say they've never had any sexual experiences with adults or other children, but they become extremely agitated when we ask them about Moses David Berg's teachings on sex.
My Little Fish. Now, your father described that as a routine publication. And that entails graphic sex.
Who had this? They're not having sex, they're just kissing and hugging in bed. That's not sex.
April is very upset that 2020's obtained a copy of My Little Fish. Ex-members tell us the cult leaders say it should be kept secret.
If you show it to other people, they don't understand. That stuff's not supposed to be publicized. So many people think sex is wrong. So many people hate us. But we just telling them the truth. We're just telling them it's not wrong. We're just telling them that there's nothing wrong with it. And here come these publicizers showing them to everybody, making everybody think it's wrong.
This is printed and circulated, though.
But why do you need it? You don't need it.
It's not a private doc. It's printed and widely circulated around the world.
You're not supposed to have it.
What exactly will it take for the children to recover from a lifetime of cult indoctrination? Psychologists 2020 talked to say these kids urgently need to be deprogrammed, and if they can get the help they need, they can make a good adjustment. But deprogramming will cost a lot of money which Vivian does not have, but hopes to one day get.
Okay, kiddo, you can do it.
Just a few weeks ago, we visited the family again and found the kids have made some adjustments. They've made new friends and learned to play baseball. All four of them did start school back in March, but only 3 of them completed the year. John dropped out after 2 weeks because he felt the school would destroy him. All of the kids, nearly 6 months after arriving in Sioux Falls, say they continue to believe in the teachings of Moses David Berg and the children of God.
I want some too.
And they want very much to return to Thailand and to their father. So for now, it's clear that the ordeal is still not over. And yet, Vivian tells us she feels good these days.
Before I had the children, I really had an ache in my heart. Well, I just don't have that ache anymore. I have a contentment there. I mean, I'm happy. How do you explain it? You've been defeated in life. Something has taken you and controlled you, and you've overcome that.
Tom, how long will it take for these children to get over this indoctrination of the children of God?
Well, Hugh, we have to remember these kids were born into this cult. This is all they have ever known. Now, for adults that go into it, it takes roughly 2 years, and that's with good deprogramming. Yeah. These youngsters don't have any real effective deprogramming efforts underway, so it's going to take a long time, and the mother's going to have the resources to get professional help.
The oldest boy seems to have the most difficulty. I wonder if he can avoid real depression in this.
They seem to genuinely want to return to their father in Thailand at this point, but it could change. Also, they have terrific support within the community. The church is with them. Senator Larry Pressler, their senator, has been very influential in trying to keep them on the right track.
Thank you, Tom.
Hello, friends. We're offering a special book that I have put together over the last 20 years, and it's finally completed. It's Christian Doctrines from an Arminian perspective. I know a lot of you request me of the question, where can I get a good book on doctrines? Well, I finished this one, and it was 20 years in the making, and I cover every doctrine, every major doctrine in Christianity. The doctrine of God, the doctrine of Jesus Christ, the doctrine of the Holy Spirit, the doctrine of the Scriptures, the doctrine of man, the doctrine of salvation, the doctrine of man's free will, the doctrine of perseverance, the doctrine of heaven, the doctrine of hell, the doctrine of sanctification, the doctrine of demons, the doctrine of Satan, the doctrine of evangelism and global missions, the millennial reign. And I have one chapter that I've dedicated to all the false doctrines in the world today, the major ones. So be sure to avail yourself of this special offer. And I'm not charging anything for this. I am accepting any size donation or love offering. And if you can't afford it, then I will get this ebook. It's an ebook. It's not a paperback book. It's an ebook that I will email to you. It's about nearly 300 pages long. And so it's a book on all the fundamental doctrines of Christianity. Make sure and order your copy of this today. Now let's get back into the program.
I don't have full recall of what happened when I was under hypnosis. I remember a lot of it, but not all of it.
I was under obedience to do what I was told. By then, the abuse had started.
I didn't want to have sex with him, or didn't want him to have sex with me, or use me for sex anymore.
They made him have sex with a dog. They cut one of his testicles out and made him eat it. They took his teeth out with a hammer and chisel.
Techniques of mind control are so effective. A lot of people think, oh, if we could just get him or her out of the group, that would be it. It's not as easy as that. Cults are very, very active in the UK. They're damaging individuals, they're damaging families, they're damaging the economy. There are up to 1,000 different cults in operation, and I'm known for being conservative with my figures.
I think everyone who manages to escape a cult and build any sort of semblance of a normal life is truly a survivor. The Children of God were formed in 1968 by a former evangelical pastor called David Berg. My parents both joined the cult as teenagers in France. They were both around 17 when they joined. This was in the first decade of the cult's existence, when the cult appeared to be quite an exciting place to be. They married within the cult and began having children. Not long after, they were sent to Thailand, where I was born. The Children of God believed that all Christians should abandon all their personal belongings and families and live fully for Christ. They became quite a large movement. So in total, I believe they had about 30,000 people pass through the cult over the decades that they were the most active. At any one time, there were about 10,000 members, of which about 60% were children because they didn't believe in contraception.
There is hidden population, though less hidden now because some of these young people are coming out talking about their experience, of people who were born or grew up in cults. It's easy for people to say, well, you know, why did you join this group? You're so stupid or needy or weak or vulnerable or whatever it is. You can't say that about the people who are born or brought up in these groups and who've really suffered terribly.
For the majority of my childhood, we lived in combo homes, very large homes, and it was run very much like a military camp. We were divided up by age groups, we had very strict schedules, we all slept together, ate together, and basically, they were raising us to be members of God's final army.
religious fanaticism or cultish behavior warps the ideology, and it makes it try to perceive to the victim, in effect, that what they're doing is actually correct, what they're doing is right, even though it's a hyper-literal interpretation of the faith.
So not only were we being trained, spiritually and physically to become soldiers, we were told that we would die as martyrs and receive, amazing gifts when we got to heaven for our sacrifice. We were told that we would have superpowers, like being able to shoot thunderbolts from our eyes. They also predicted the end of the world several times, which meant that we children were brought up with the firm knowledge that we were going to die most likely in our teenage years.
You have this total belief system or total ideology where you can only believe the cult beliefs, nothing else. This is all you need to know. It covers everything. So, forget all the other things that you might be interested in. And we can explain everything that ever happened in the world and ever will happen in the world.
If they can play to some of their fears and tell them that, well, actually, the world itself is coming to an end as well, they portray this, in effect, a doomsday type scenario, which makes those individuals fearful for their own lives.
I can't say I remember many moments where I was happy. I think the fact that we were not allowed to see our parents as much as most children would, or even our own siblings, meant that, you just felt very alone, often, no matter how many people were surrounding you. We had a lot of time being brainwashed with Berg's doctrines. No matter what kind of relationship you were in, everyone was encouraged to sleep with everyone else who was in their commune, to the point that they actually had sexual sharing schedules. So people didn't even have the option of who they wanted to sleep with. They were told who, when, and how.
Cults do not allow free choice. Other organizations, the churches, your local social group allows free choice to become a member or not. What you see is what you get in a legitimate organization. That's not what you get in a cult.
Things escalated when David Berg brought out the law of love. He brought out several letters about child sex in which he claimed that it was acceptable for children to experiment sexually and be sexually active by the time they hit puberty, which for some girls and boys would be about the age of 12 or 13. This, unfortunately, caused quite a wave of child sex abuse in the cult, where every person who was inclined that way took his doctrines as the go-ahead to abuse children. And unfortunately, I was one of them. At the age of 4, I was abused on multiple occasions by an adult man who lived in our home and who looked after us children.
The children of God have been known for the abuse of people from very early days. And what's happened to people in that organization is quite tragic.
It was in my second year at art school. I had come out of a marriage. Emotionally, I was lost. I was just really interested in broadening my horizon. I saw posters for Native American shaman. I thought that would be interesting to go and check out this guy, imagining it'd be a wizened old man with a white beard. And this person who arrived on the platform was a young, easygoing American guy, like a chap next door, who just happened to have a very big gift in healing, as he said. He had whopping great eyes, and he was issuing out love, it seemed, from those eyes. He looked at me and said, you're the one. You can help me. You're strong. You can really help me. And it was like, okay, that's me. At last, I know where I belong.
People assume that there has to be something wrong with you to finish up in a cult. Simply not true. If you're a caring, loving person who wants to either better themselves or make life better for others, then you're an easy target.
So a lot of these individuals, if they are having personal problems in their family, if they suddenly meet somebody who's offering them a solution to many of the questions that they have, then you are giving them what they're looking for, what society can't give them. And I think that's one of the most powerful things about cults.
Somebody had given over her house to him in London, turned it into sort of a temple kind of thing. This was over months, but clearly it was, say, this group was getting tighter.
If you can control other people, you can get some fringe benefits. You can get sex, you can get money, you can get free labor, you can get adulation. But I think the fundamental motivation is to control others, to control kind of your environment.
It was like my outer life was diminishing and the life within was getting stronger. As it went on, he then dropped his Christian name and started using a Tibetan name because he started claiming that he was the proper Buddha. Not that the Dalai Lama wasn't the real Dalai Lama, but in fact he was. And he was also not only the Dalai Lama, but that he was also Jesus reincarnated. And I totally took it on board. I thought, yeah, I know that's real. I know that's right. And he said, yeah, the people who have formed themselves around me, and I was one of them, are the disciples reincarnated. And I thought, I haven't got a problem with that.
I would argue that the average cult member, although he or she isn't aware of it, is no longer critically able. They're no longer able to critically evaluate. It's as though they can just switch off logic in the person's mind. And so when cult members say peculiar things, when they do peculiar things that don't seem to make sense to the rest of us, it makes perfect sense to them because they're doing what they're programmed psychologically to do.
And amazingly, out of the blue, I was called. So I became his partner. He decided that I was actually his true partner. He dumped his wife and decided I was the one. And it was like, what? If he was Jesus, I was Mary. And I really believed that. You know, I really believed it because I had no choice to believe it. But I was then by his side. So that, yeah, the sexual abuse did start then.
The sexual abuse that I went through happened on multiple occasions and over several months before this person was actually excommunicated because another child he abused had complained. But I never spoke about it, and I didn't tell my parents about it for a decade because there was also the fear of, you know, if you reported something that happened to you, you were then seen as someone who was lying, you weren't necessarily believed. You know, there was very much a culture of protecting the abusers in the cult.
Sadly, it's not unusual for cults to be involved in sexual abuse, and for those being brought up in it, that's just their reality until they manage to escape, if they manage to escape.
Cult leaders fit the profile of psychopaths. They are charming, seductive, manipulative, they lack empathy, they're highly intelligent.
I was under, obedience to do what I was told, and there was no kindness in that anymore. The horror started at that point because he started really launching into our characters, how bad we were and how we had to really either be close to him or go to hell. That he decided, no, I wasn't Mary at all. I was in fact Lilith. I was the archdemon. Which of course, by then, I again fully believed, and at that point I was suicidal. Because I thought, well, there's nowhere for me, I don't know what to do. But he even warned us against that don't commit suicide, said don't even think of it, because you might be in hell here, but you won't get away from me. Even if you die, I'll be there, because I'm God. And that's what stopped me killing myself. Because I was there, with the razor blades in the bathroom. It was, I can't tell you, the hell was just indescribable.
David Berg introduced another doctrine called flirty fishing, which was the belief that women, in particular, should use their bodies in order to win people to Christ. It soon became clear, as with all his other doctrines, that there was another agenda. And, before long, women were being sent out to apparently win souls for Christ, but to encourage those that they were spending time with to donate financially to the cult. This escalated in no time to religious prostitution, where women were being sent out solely to fundraise and offering their bodies in return.
As far as sexual abuse goes, it's usually one extreme or the other. You're either forced to be involved in sex with whoever walks in through the door, or no sex at all. And for those being brought up in it, that's just their reality.
These women genuinely believed that they were doing something for God. I don't think they saw how they were being used. I think the way all cults brainwash their members is pretty much the same.
Techniques of mind control, the same techniques are used to radicalize people. They're sometimes called techniques of psychological coercion, and they do break people down psychologically. And those techniques, for me, are the key to understanding the cult phenomenon.
My name's Mark. I was involved in a Buddhist group, which I now consider to be a cult. There is a hidden dark side to the group. Since that time, I've been trying to warn people. I was a bit sort of a disaffected teenager, really, when I left school. At that time, I'd heard about cults. Only somebody who's sort of weak-willed and gullible would ever get involved in a cult. I had been going along to this Buddhist group in North London to learn meditation. The leader sort of took an interest in me. He had been ordained as a Buddhist monk. I quite liked the idea of helping him in his work of, what he claimed was his work of helping to bring Buddhism to the West. But he was able to twist that into saying, we need to break through our psychological conditioning, and particularly our conditioning as regards sexual orientation. And I looked upon him as a teacher and tried to follow his teachings, and basically he led me up the garden path. But I didn't know that at the time, or didn't sort of see that. He took advantage of my good nature.
Everyone says that if someone is sick, or if they're a drug addict, or if they've been a victim of a crime, they should be helped. Whereas in this instance, for some reason, because they've joined a so-called faith voluntarily, it's thought that they don't deserve any help.
Not just religion, but any kind of idealist sort of outlook on the world can take advantage of people's naivety and goodwill and twist it for their own ends. I didn't know much about Buddhism, so I wasn't able to separate out the genuine Buddhism for them from his subtly twisted version of it. He likes sort of manipulating young heterosexual men to try and change their sexual orientation, or at least let him engage in sexual acts with them. So I think it's basically a power thing, personal gratification, I think.
Coercive control legislation that we have now, which only applies within a domestic context, has to apply within groups.
Well, the worst thing from my point of view is he tried to make out that my feelings of love or affection for women were a sort of neurotic projection, which I had to overcome if I was to kind of break through my conditioning and sort of make progress on the Buddhist path. I see myself as very much a victim of misuses of people's goodwill to gain power over them, to get money out of them, and to get sex out of them. And I fell victim to all three.
shouldn't get out. They should not get out. They should die in jail, because life should mean life. If you take a life, you should die in jail. The perpetrator of the cult, he put his head down and didn't even look at the judge, because he knew what he had done was despicable. He knew the evil that he had done to him.
I think the word cult did enter all of our minds at a very early stage, because what was being described was a single individual who had gathered around him a number of vulnerable people and who was exercising complete control over their lives, deciding where they lived, what they did, even where they ate.
They were compliant because of a leader called Zaid Zaman, who I would call an individual that had Machiavellian traits, that was cunning, he was sinister, he was devious, and he essentially used individuals for his own pleasure and gratification.
So the group with which the case was concerned comprised 5 individuals. The eldest was Kay Rayworth. Her life had taken a downturn in about 2004 when she had divorced. Following that, she'd become involved in internet dating, and it was through that she was to meet the younger man, Zaid Zaman, who was known as Zed. But then we had, of course, Jimmy Prout, Myra Wood, and the 5th member of the group was Anne Corbett.
I don't know what the definition of what a cult is, but these 5 were very much together, and 4 of them turned on one of them.
The kind of cultish behaviour that this case revealed often occurs totally under the radar, and so the British public were being exposed for the first time, or probably the first time, to something that was very new to them. And secondly, the public was outraged, I believe, and rightly, by the brutal and barbaric way in which Jimmy had been treated by people that he thought were his friends.
Me and Jimmy met in 1982 in Newcastle. He was on a stall in the town centre, and we just got chatting, and that was it. He was fun-loving, he was funny, he was daft as a brush, he would do anything for anybody. We were together for 14 years, and then after a while he was having an affairs behind me back. We were getting in trouble with the police, and I says, right, just leave, I don't want nothing more to do with you anymore. I did see him around town. The old Jimmy, he was clean, he was tidy, he was always smartly dressed. But then the Jimmy I seen just before the Christmas, he was scruffy. And I'm thinking, well, and I'm thinking, that's not Jimmy. And I says, hello, how are you? And he said, I'm fine. But the person that he was with dragged him away. And that was the last time I had seen him, was 2 weeks before Christmas. And I had never seen him after that. So I didn't know what had happened to him.
Jimmy was a man with vulnerabilities who, by the time that Zaid Zaman met him, was reliant to some extent at least upon soup kitchens, and so he was typical prey for Zaid Zaman.
They knew he was vulnerable. They knew he was homeless. I'm thinking, why didn't you just walk away? But as I say, he was too vulnerable, he was too scared.
During the latter stages of 2015, Jimmy posted to Facebook images of injuries to various parts of his body. To his face, to his torso, and in particular to his back, where he had terrible bruising. And in due course we were to discover that he had a series of broken bones, including what must have been an extremely painful fracture to his scapula.
When I seen the photos on his website page, it made me feel very sick. I've never seen anything like that, as though he had been beaten to within an inch of his life. I could tell by how scared he was by his images and the face on him, how scared he really, really was. The police turned up at our door at 10:30 on the Easter Saturday night. And they went, we've come looking for Jimmy. He had been missing since February. And I just thought nothing of it because Jimmy being Jimmy, he used to do it all the time. And then it was a Sunday when I got that phone call. He died between the 9th and the 10th of February that year.
Well, the police were notified on the 25th of March 2016 as a result of a phone call to the police from Zahid Zaman in relation to the fact that he'd been assaulted by one of his friends, Anne Corbett.
He handed to the police 3 pieces of paper that he said he'd torn from Anne Corbett as she fled the scene, on which pieces of paper were a confession by Anne Corbett to the murder.
Zaman himself, whilst there, was extravagantly upset. He was very upset. He was crying, he was screaming out loud, and this was all recorded on the officer's body-worn video, demonstrating how upset he was at the thought that his good friend James Prout was dead.
Police officers then spoke to others in the house. So a lady called Kay Rayworth, who had been at one stage Zahid Zaman's partner but still lived with him. She filled in some of the details, but again, they were lies. She maintained the story that Anne Corbett was responsible for the death of Jimmy Prout, and another person who had lived with Jimmy Prout, called Myra Wood, who was the partner of Zahid Zaman. She chipped in again to corroborate this false story, as it turned out, that Anne Corbett was solely responsible for the killing of Jimmy Prout.
Corbett was located. Corbett was obviously aware that she'd wrote the note. She agreed that wrote the note, but it was as a result of the coercion that Zaman had put her under, and she wrote it at his behest. And when confronted with the police being arrested for murder, it unravelled in relation to what was going on, and she started telling what had happened. Firstly, she was able to tell us where James's body was, which was some 150 yards away from the address, buried in some undergrowth, and had been there for approximately 6 weeks. She also confirmed that they'd even been back to the body to recover a bank card from his pocket so that he could take money out of his bank account. She also confirmed that Jimmy had been abused by all of them and assaulted over a period of time. She also confirmed that she herself had been involved in that and a number of assaults, including some horrific incidents of appalling abuse on Jimmy on the weeks and months leading up to his eventual death, whereby, at Zaman's request, Corbett put some trousers over James's mouth and evidently suffocated him.
He invited me into his flat he shared with 2 others at that time. And I thought he was just extending friendship. But obviously, with the benefit of hindsight, he wanted to be available for his own sexual gratification. He used to masturbate himself on my stomach. And that was his thing, really. It went along like that for about 4 years. My parents had both died by that time, so I was able to buy a big country house in the Norfolk countryside for them to run retreats and everything. So I was living there with a number of other of his disciples. And then I told him I didn't want to have sex with him, or didn't want to have him have sex with me, or use me for sex anymore. I eventually found the strength to say, no, go away.
When I look back now on my childhood, you know, for many years I was very angry and bitter about what the cult had done. But I think now when I think back, you know, not only to myself, but to all the other children who were raised in the cult, I just feel an immense sadness because, you know, we weren't allowed to be children. We didn't have childhoods. The day I left was a bittersweet day. I had a lot of younger siblings at that point, and I'd been very involved in looking after them. So, you know, leaving them was almost like leaving my own children. You know, I couldn't be 100% certain that my siblings were safe. And yet, I knew that I had to escape because I would be of no good to anyone in the cult. It was a moment of elation because finally I had freedom. where I was finally going to get a chance to think for myself and to do things that I wanted to do and build my own life. Of course, I thought it'd be that simple, but it really wasn't. You know, I went on to realize very quickly that I was just not able to integrate into the world. I had no idea who I was. I had no idea what my personality was. Your entire brain has been programmed by someone else. You have no idea which thoughts are yours and which thoughts have been placed in your head by the cult.
Techniques of mind control are so effective. A lot of people think, oh, if we could just get him or her out of the group, that would be it. It's not as easy as that. You can take someone out of a cult, but getting the cult out of the person is another thing altogether.
Psychologically, that sort of hook of being part of a cult is very difficult to always leave. So even when you do leave and you want to reintegrate, you'll still have that sense of dependency on the cult. And it's very hard to deprogram somebody.
You really need to educate yourself about what has happened to you. Don't stay in the wilderness of thinking you're the worst person in the world, because you're not. You're actually one of the best.
It's lovely. You okay?
Just got me.
We moved into this retreat centre in the Norfolk countryside in 1976, and I eventually broke free in 1986. And it so happens that I had read the novel Jane Eyre, which is sort of about love. That sort of kind of catalysed me into seeing that all this stuff he'd been saying about love is just a neurotic projection and so on, it was just complete nonsense. It was untrue. And once I saw it was untrue, I began to see that all the rest of his teaching was untrue. I sort of saw through them. They turned against me once I started criticising the leader in the group. So they kind of pushed me out, more or less. I owned sort of majority share of this retreat centre. They eventually persuaded me to sell it to them. It has affected my life a great deal. I don't have a job or a partner or any great role in life other than as an ex-cult member. Because if I hadn't been involved in the cult, I wouldn't have been involved in trying to warn people about cults from going through the same sort of things as I went through.
It was a Sunday when I got that phone call that I had been found dead. I just went, wait. And I was like crying and speaking about it at the same time. I was just shocked. I thought Jimmy hated fighting. If somebody went towards him to have a go at him, he would run. So I can't understand Jimmy. Why didn't he run? Why didn't he leave? But he was so scared to leave. I just wish I could have heard his voice again to say that I was sorry. I shouldn't have left him.
I'd had experience of gangland cases in which there would commonly be a hierarchy and a senior figure who controlled other persons. But I'd never experienced a situation in which one individual had such a significant, indeed complete degree of control over every aspect of the lives of a number of other people. The level of brutality to which Jimmy Prout was subjected was wholly exceptional. He wasn't just beaten with fists and feet. It wasn't just that weapons were taken to him on a very regular basis, but he was also subject to terrible tortures.
They made him have sex with a dog. They cut one of his testicles out. They made him eat it. They took his teeth out with a hammer and chisel. They battered him.
And so the final months of Jimmy's life from late 2015 to early 2016 were marked by what can only be described as daily tortures, and tortures of the type that perhaps hadn't been seen since the Dark Ages.
These are descriptions of sadism. Individuals were getting pleasure out of inflicting harm on him.
All of us who were involved in the case were affected by what we knew Jimmy had been through, and there were some very clear demonstrations of that. So we had CCTV footage.
They were showing the CCTV cameras, like unkempt. That wasn't the Jimmy I knew. The way he was walking, they were tying him, dragging him, that.
And then we had the final footage of him on the 6th of February 2016. A man barely able to stand, bearded, being dragged down the street. And so we were able to see with our own eyes the deterioration in this man as a result of the way in which he was being treated. And no one could fail to be affected by that.
They are the worst of criminals that you're ever going to meet, and they are capable of the worst behaviour, some of which I've experienced in my experience as a police officer.
So in court, Zahid Zaman remained confident, and I've no doubt that he thought that he could manipulate the process and manipulate the outcome by telling lie after lie. But during the course of cross-examination, his lies, which were absolutely obvious, were exposed very clearly for the jury.
Zahid Zaman and Ann Corbett were found guilty of murder. They both received life imprisonment, and Myra Wood and Kay Rayworth were found guilty of allowing the death of a vulnerable adult.
The day they were sentenced, when we found out when they were sentenced and what sentence they were getting, we all jumped up and told them to rot in jail.
Cult leaders send out recruiters to talk to people, find out what makes them tick, home in on that area of interest and bring them in through the door. The people that say it could never happen to me are usually the easiest people to recruit. Life prior to involvement in the cult was great. I was in a job that I enjoyed. By the time the course had finished, I'd given the group all the money I had, which was $1,550-some in my current account. And I dedicated my life to the group. I went to work the next day and resigned from my job. They hypnotized us 16 times in the 4-day course. The course would go on till 1 or 2 in the morning, so we were becoming sleep deprived, and by the end of the course, you're theirs. Once I'd escaped from the cult, I was quite a mess for the 11 months of withdrawal that I then went through. I wouldn't wish that experience on anybody. Today we equate a lot of the symptoms with post-traumatic stress disorder. I think it still stands on its own though.
It's very difficult when you come out of a cult. You feel like you're just dropping off the edge of the planet. It's the most strange experience. It was organized as a cell structure. We had different names. I was Claire, and I was NB25. Very soon after I formally joined, I was set up in a relationship with someone in the group, a sort of arranged marriage. Little memos would come to you from your contact in these little beige envelopes telling you what to do. And I got a memo one day, as did my husband, saying we should have children. So we did go on to have children as requested, ordered. Decisions about reproduction and your family are taken out of your control. You have no time to reflect on what's going on. So I stayed for another 9 years and eventually got out. When my son was about 5, one of the things that helped me start to be able to regain my sensible thinking was we got one of these memos criticizing how we were raising our son. I just was like, I'm out of here. This group is crazy and I'm out of here.
Cults are not a thing of the past. I think that's a misconception a lot of people have. The issue now is that they are smarter and they have more ways to hide and more ways to operate undetected.
Some cults in the UK might have 50 members. Others will have thousands of members. They will vary a great deal, but it is a huge problem, and people are being recruited every week.
I'm not sure anyone ever truly gets over a cult experience. At least 100 have already committed suicide, you know, of people who were in the cult.
I would like to see us take this on as a public health issue in a very serious way. It's not going away, and it's much more prevalent than we think.
In terms of accountability, it's just not there. I think there should be. Not only to make cults accountable for their activity, but also to protect individuals and families.
If people could understand the real dangers that cults present, groups like ISIS and Al-Qaeda recruit and indoctrinate and manipulate their members in very much the same sort of ways.
I think cult leaders should be prosecuted for these crimes. I think it's a time in society now that society, the police, CPS, the criminal justice system more generally starts to take cults seriously.
These groups are getting away with murder and still are. The only thing apart from governmental action which will help with that is publicity.
It almost feels like these cult leaders and abusers are untouchable. I don't know if there is some fear of authorities being accused of religious persecution. I don't know what it is. What I do know is that nothing's being done.
Hello friends, I hope you're enjoying today's program. If it's a blessing to you, I would encourage you to like the video, to comment on it, and most importantly, to subscribe to my YouTube channel, share these videos. We want to get the message of the true truth of the true gospel out there, and the more you like my videos and comment on them and subscribe, then that helps the algorithm. Again, I pray that today's show has been a blessing to you, and we're going to get right back into it. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel. Let's get back into today's program.
Your body is not your own.
Believe it or not, things are about to get even more disturbing.
As women, you couldn't really refuse to have sex.
Is he even like a human being? How is someone like that created or born?
It's been over 50 years of this, and it's still not over. Welcome back to Rise and Fall. This particular episode is very hard today, so we're warning you now. You might know them as the Children of God or the Family International, but they've gone through many names. We'll be referring to the group as Children of God throughout this episode. We are so lucky to have a Children of God survivor, Faith Jones, whose grandfather actually started the cult, here with us today. So, let's get into it.
Picture this, kiddos. It's 1968 in Huntington Beach, California. Just last summer, up the California coast in San Francisco, nearly 100,000 people were indulging in the Summer of Love, a celebration of sex, drugs, and rock and roll that reverberated across the whole U.S.
This is you. Sex, drugs, and rock and roll.
You know what, and I wear it proudly.
Your mom hates those godless hippie fornicators, but she will let you go to Bible study at your local coffee shop with a cool new pastor. His ideas about free love are actually a lot like the hippies. He tells you Jesus wants you to in your and your maybe even eat something, you know?
Oh my God! Even mom can't argue with that. So how did a man preaching about Jesus and free love out of the back of a coffee shop bring about one of the most pervasive and longest lasting cults in U.S. history, still in operation to this day? Let's find out.
David Berg was born in 1919 in California. His parents were evangelists in the Christian and Missionary Alliance. From a young age, he believed his existence was miraculous, his purpose divine. The first self-described miracle was his birth. He survived being born with the flu during the 1918 influenza pandemic. According to the Family International website, at 3, a car ran over Berg's foot, and despite doctors believing he would never walk again, he soon was walking. In another alleged medical anomaly, he nearly lost his sight after a water heater exploded in his face, but once again, recovered against the odds. It seems like the universe was trying to delete him.
Berg claimed to have a sexual relationship with his nanny as a child that he viewed as a positive experience, a deeply harmful perspective that would contribute to future claims of child abuse within his organization. This dynamic would ultimately come back to haunt his family, culminating in his stepson's tragic murder-suicide, but more on that later.
As an adult, he became a pastor for the Christian and Missionary Alliance. He worked at a small church for a few years, but left under mysterious circumstances. He claimed he quit in protest of racism he witnessed in his congregation. However, he did preach anti-Black and anti-Semitic beliefs in his lifetime, such as, quote, Jews and blacks were conspiring to ruin the world, end quote. I think there's a more plausible explanation put forth by his estranged daughter, who alleges the real reason he left was due to his sexual misconduct.
After leaving the Christian and Missionary Alliance, he worked as a traveling evangelist until his mother died in 1968. He then took over her work at the Light Club Coffee House about 100 feet from the sunny Huntington Beach Pier. It was here he established Teens for Christ, melding Christian beliefs, self-proclaimed prophecies, and his free will and law of love. A cool way for a 50-year-old man to convince teen girls to have sex with him. Got a lot of red flags right out of the gate.
It's giving Manson energy.
Mm-hmm.
By 1969, he renamed the group Children of God and referred to himself as Moses David. After one of his prophecies foretold a devastating earthquake, the group left California and they began to spread across the Midwest so that they could warn people about the end of the world.
At first, recruitment tactics were relatively standard, handing out literature and scrapbooks depicting their beliefs at college campuses or protests, seeking an audience of young radicals open to an alternative lifestyle. He encouraged these young people to become estranged from judgmental parents, calling for a revolution for Jesus. They targeted people at juvenile halfway homes, local YMCAs, retirement homes, and gang members, amongst others. Oftentimes they sought donations like money or meals, if not actual converts.
By 1971, the group had caused enough controversy that Berg went into hiding, leading the group from a secret undisclosed location for the rest of his life. Some believe he went as far as Japan. Even before that, he was an elusive figure, never preaching in public and rarely photographed. The most his followers saw of him was drawn as a cartoon in cult literature, originally called the Mo Letters. He delivered his messages in comic book form, mixing the images with liturgy. I love watching anime and I love comic books, you know, very deep in the Marvel universe.
Mm-hmm.
I would have liked the comic books. I like comic books.
I mean, how narcissistic do you have to be to have people make a comic book about you? I don't know, maybe it's more digestible.
Yeah, and it's also more appealing to kids.
Yeah. So you would have been so far kind of into this part.
Because I would have been a teen, right?
Yeah.
Teen Joyce is gullible.
I'm Faith Jones. I am an attorney and an author, and the granddaughter of David Berg, the founder of the Children of God.
What was your relationship with your grandfather like?
My grandfather pervaded every single aspect of our lives. His teachings, the Mo letters, which is, the comic books, that everything was all based on his teachings. But at the same time, I never met him in person. By the time I was born, he was already in hiding. His whereabouts was the most highly kept secret of the group. My mother, she joined when she was very young, I think maybe 20, 21 years old. She came out of the hippie generation. My father was the son of the founder. My parents really helped found the group initially. He was everybody's grandfather. That was how he was portrayed, because when you were in the group, you really left your outside influences, outside families. We had a very unusual and interesting life. Grew up in a big family. My dad had 2 wives. I knew that that was very unusual in the world, but my parents were very happy. We grew up on a farm with lots of animals and very active. I always looked back on my childhood as being quite happy, which is interesting, but there was also a lot of abuses. There were things that happened that I knew made me afraid, but that wasn't the same as bad. We didn't go to school, our parents didn't work. The whole group was designed to completely live and exist outside of society.
Berg expected his followers to isolate themselves socially from normative society and the people plugged into it, who he referred to as systemites. From their communes and shared living spaces, cult members were expected to communicate with him via video, filming thousands of hours to show him what their daily life was like, giving them a nickname as the original camcorder cult.
Followers practicing communal living were discouraged from having jobs outside the commune or sending their children to formal school for the fear that systemites would threaten their way of life. Berg went so far as to threaten that Antichrist forces would kill them or the government would imprison them. He punished members who attracted bad publicity, even the children, who were expected to evangelize and work upwards to 30 to 40 hours a week.
Our homeschooling was maybe a few hours a day. I think for a lot of kids it was a bit sporadic. If there was something more important to do, like go out and witness about Jesus, then school was sort of brushed to the side. My grandfather didn't feel that you needed more than about an 8th grade education. I think probably a lot of kids got about a 6th grade education. And after that you were just supposed to learn basic skills because you weren't going to get a job. You were growing up in the family, you were going to have babies, either take care of kids, go out singing, go out witnessing, wash dishes, clean the house. Like, there wasn't really something to aspire to.
According to the 1994 documentary, Children of God, Berg ruled over every facet of daily life. Followers were told how many sheets of toilet paper they could use to wipe themselves. 3. How many cups of coffee they could drink, what they could wear, and more.
No one's gonna tell me how many tissue papers to wash my ass with. So. Right there, I would have been out. What a rat.
Among their many restrictions, followers were generally forbidden to read anything that wasn't Berg's religious literature and were discouraged from taking medicine.
So the foundation was supposed to be the Bible, but of course my grandfather had his own interpretation. Some of the fundamental principles were to be separate from society, not work for mammon. They used the verse, everyone lived together and had all things common, which meant that nobody owned anything. You didn't have any personal ownership possessions, you didn't own property, you didn't buy stuff. So you were not supposed to take sort of ownership of your own family, even not your own wife, husband, children. Any money that came in or any money that you earned, you had to turn it over to the group. They didn't believe in birth control, so they had very big families.
So how many siblings did you have?
I have 12 now, mostly all half-siblings. You imagine trying to support and feed yourselves and these children on donations and going out busking. It was a very, very difficult life, very sacrificial life. And then the other thing that I think the group really became famous for was its beliefs around sex.
Much of Berg's theology mimicked counterculture ideology. The idea of free love became the law of love, a celebration of sexuality that discouraged shame and taboo. While this sounds great in theory, it quickly became exploitative. He enforced participation in practices such as sharing, a term he used to motivate followers to engage in a polyamorous manner, but to an extreme. He believed there shouldn't be any rules that would limit a sexual partner, which is why some allege sharing extended to minors as well for a period of time. Can you give us more insight on the child abuse that occurred in the Children of God?
There was never a time I didn't know what sex was. My earliest coloring book was how babies are made, with all the diagrams and all the pictures and like a hippie couple with a big erection and everything. I was coloring that when I was 3. They didn't want their children to have sort of the sexual repression and the hang-ups that many people had grown up with So they were like, well, sex is beautiful and it's natural and it's clean and we should be open about it. But there was a sense I had inside myself, even though I was taught that this is all fine, I could feel it. It didn't feel right.
Believe it or not, things are about to get even more disturbing. In letters written by Berg in 1985, he wrote, quote, "I think as children, before the girls start menstruating and the boys start seminating, that's their opportunity to have all the sex they want. For the sake of potential problems with the system, we've set a rule for our girls that they can't have sex after their period till they're 15, to avoid them having babies so young that they are shocking the doctors and authorities," end quote.
You were considered to be an adult when you were 12. Some of the older girls than me ended up, having to have sex with adult men when they were 12. And I think that really, had a strong impact on them.
Former female members have testified that women couldn't say no to being shared when men propositioned them. They were made to feel they were unloving, uncaring, failing themselves in the group, and that they didn't belong there if they tried to refuse sex. Some described it retrospectively as humiliating and compared it to slavery. Contraception was banned, so the woman gave birth a lot to give more children to the cult that abused them for the pleasure of a man.
There's like a degree of detachment I can feel myself kind of deploying because this is so horrible. As kids, that's what you're learning growing up. You're seeing that happen to your mom or your sister. It's like a prison.
And you can't say no, you can't. And then you watch your child, can't say no either.
The gravity of it is just, it's too much.
When the sexualization came into the cult, he did it slowly. He was prepping. People were joining at 14, 15, 16, 19, 20 years old. When my grandfather brought in this concept of sexual freedom, it was also the 70s. That was all the rage then. That's what everybody was doing. So it wasn't such a stretch.
By 1974, the Children of God were forced to flee the U.S. The New York Attorney General had opened an investigation on what they referred to as a cult in official documentation. They were on a mission to find evidence of tax evasion, rape, polygamy, draft dodging, incest, and kidnapping, among other crimes. Ultimately, they were not able to prosecute, a ruling that was considered a little shocking and vague at the time. Apparently, much of the evidence they found fell under First Amendment rights, generally speaking, constitutional protection to freedom of religion.
Within a decade of its creation, the Children of God had 4,500 members living in 600 communes across 70 different countries. Now international, with hundreds of communes in dozens of countries around the world, Berg saw a whole world of possibilities, so many people to convert. But how would he reach them? Within a few years, the group had rebranded as The Family, or The Family of Love. Perhaps an attempt at a clean slate after their legal issues, though he still could not escape it. In 1978, the same year as their official rebrand, the country of France banned the group.
It's more likely the rebrand was the result of infighting caused by Berg's hungry new recruitment strategies. Around this time, they somehow plummeted even further down the moral rabbit hole. He began emphasizing unchecked sharing, sexual sharing, but with fewer rules than before, as central to their theology.
My grandfather had twisted those verses in the Bible that talk about, if a man hunger, give him food, if he thirst, give him to drink, give him your coat kind of thing, right? And he would say, well, sex is a bodily need, just like food and clothing and stuff, so you need to be willing to give that to, your fellow man. And so they would have a schedule, even on the wall, with who was supposed to sleep with who. If there were unmarried men, they would have a weekly sharing schedule.
He began preaching that women's duty was to use sex to gain new male members. This practice became known as flirty fishing. Berg gave various instructions on how to accomplish this, writing, tease him, flirt with him, then screw him until he drops over, end quote.
My personal experience with flirty fishing was really experiencing my mother doing it. When I was a kid, I would sometimes go along with my mother. For a lot of the women, it was a sacrifice. They were told, your body is not your own. And even as I grew up, and being made to sleep with men within the group that I didn't want to, that was always the concept for everything. You don't own yourself. Your body is not your own. Because when you can get someone to believe they don't own themselves, they have no right to speak up. They have no right to say no. then you can get them to do all kinds of things.
This man sees nothing but his own goals and wants, and then people are just pawns.
It really shows that he wants more power because he wants to abuse more people.
These changes didn't go over well with all members.
Some people did have a problem with it, and there were some people that left. It wasn't like people just accepted it automatically. A lot of people left when they began to have the child sex.
Actor Joaquin Phoenix's family were members of the Children of God until 1977. He claims his parents decided to leave the group due to the rise of flirty fishing, but it was not soon enough. His older brother, River Phoenix, who was 7 when his family left, said he was sexually assaulted for the first time when he was 4 years old. River, a talented actor, Hollywood heartthrob, and tragic historical symbol, died by overdose at just 23 years old.
Likewise, actress Rose McGowan described her family's attempt to leave the cult in the early 80s. Her father worked as a cartoonist on Berg's Mo letters, which later organized into a periodical called The New Good News. When he was asked to start illustrating comics depicting sharing between adults and children, he knew he had to go. Rose was 9 at the time, and after they fled, McGowan says her family was forced to move multiple times as the group continued to find, harass, and threaten them into coming back.
She told People magazine in 2011, quote, "We had to leave on the sly. My dad, Nat, Daisy, and I escaped with my dad's other wife in the middle of the night. I remember running through a cornfield in thunder and lightning, holding my dad's hand and running as fast as I could to keep up with him. We hid in an old stone house and had to boil pots of hot water to take baths. The cult sent people to find us. I remember a man trying to break in with a hammer."
While Berg lost some followers implementing his fishy new philosophy, on the whole, the family kept growing. Once again, they were 15,000 members strong at its peak. It wasn't until 1987, when the AIDS epidemic and STI outbreaks began to affect the group, that the practice of flirty fishing ended. The family passed new codes surrounding children's safety in 1983, but ex-members say those rules were not seriously acknowledged or enforced for years.
They were starting to get heat from authorities, but also even within the group, as these young kids were growing up, and then they were starting to share their experiences and share how traumatizing it was for them to have adult men coming onto them and trying to fondle them and stuff when they were, kids and stuff. I think they also began to see that maybe it wasn't the most helpful practice. That didn't change the concept within the group.
In the early 90s, over a decade after their exile, members of the family began to reappear in the US, where somehow their existence began to be normalized. In 1992, the group performed music for First Lady Barbara Bush at the White House. And by 1993, new communes began to pop up, especially in sunny Southern California, back where it all started. However, around the world, they were causing controversy as fishing had gotten them into hot water.
One of the big things that had happened in the group was there was no objective standard. The right became whatever the cult leader made up. You see this so much in cults, where some leader or some man takes whatever the doctrine is and twists it to fit their own need for control or their own perversions, to satisfy their own desires. That corruption ends up really hurting a lot of people and ends up taking something where there was a lot of sort of positive things that these young people were trying to do and just creating so much abuse.
By the late 80s, a third of members lived in Latin America, a sizable population that attracted negative attention from authorities. In 1990, the Argentinian government raided a family property, seizing cocaine, pornographic videos, and children's books with condoms between the pages. Because most of the evidence was considered circumstantial, they were unable to prosecute at large. But it did put the group on Interpol's watch list, and they began their own investigation into David Berg.
In Spain in 1992, officials arrested 10 members for allegedly perverting children. By 1993, raids on the family in France, where their existence had been outlawed, led to many arrests and at least 72 children placed in protective custody. That same year in Argentina, officials conducted another raid that resulted in hundreds of people being taken into custody, many of whom were international citizens. By some estimates, as many as 140 children were taken into protective care, but later returned to their families.
Meanwhile, down under, the Australian government investigated 6 of their communes around Sydney and Melbourne, removing 142 minors who officials suspected were sexually abused. The cities were forced to drop charges due to insufficient evidence, and the kids were returned to their parents. Berg slipped through the cracks again thanks to tricky legal loopholes. This brings us up to 1993, the year that Berg predicted as the end of days for many years. Dating back to his early prophecies in the 70s, Berg predicted that the Antichrist was coming, triggering the end of the world. At one point, he believed a comet would strike Earth and destroy the US. And obviously, as those dates passed, his ETA for the apocalypse had to shift.
But 1993 came and went. Bill Clinton became president without the Antichrist or world-ending comet. Berg only survived it a few months, passing away in 1994, called home by the spirits of the men he delusionally claimed to be his personal guides: Martin Luther, Douglas MacArthur, Rasputin, and the Pied Piper. Upon his death, Berg's legal wife, Karen Zerby, took over. She went by monikers like Maria and Eve.
Under Karen's leadership, some changes were eventually made. By 2004, a decade after Berg's death, she changed her name from The Family to The Family International. With the name change came the loosening of some rules, such as allowing people to have jobs in society and live outside of a commune. However, until 2009, the cult was still heavily focused on the imminent apocalypse.
For decades, they preached that becoming one of their members was the only way to ensure your soul would go to heaven after the apocalypse. But with the change in theology published in 2009, they claimed the apocalypse was not necessarily imminent and instructed followers to make plans for the future. Turns out your soul is probably safe for now.
In 2005, David Berg's stepson, Ricky Rodriguez, died in a murder-suicide after stabbing a former nanny who he alleged had sexually abused him as a child. Ricky left a video describing the murder as an act of vengeance for what he and his sisters had suffered in childhood.
He went on the record to say that Berg had sexually abused his own daughters and granddaughters, and that he hoped to one day see his mother held responsible and prosecuted for child abuse. But even as he came forward, little to no action was taken. Perhaps a factor into why he would want to take matters tragically into his own hands at the age of 29. He wasn't the only one whose trauma escalated to violent endings. Between 1992 and 2005, the Family International confirmed at least 10 suicides by former members, but groups of ex-members believe that number to be at least 3 times higher, with as many as 30 possible victims. Perhaps most haunting was the Victor program, a separate facility that was created to punitively hold and retrain teenagers and adults who pushed back against Berg's expectations. One ex-member says his brother, who later died by suicide, was forced to be a part of it. He was part of a detention and retraining program involving sleep deprivation, food deprivation, manual labor, silence restriction, and isolation. Another ex-member who also died by suicide described it as an oppressive and brutal system of thought reform, which utilized mental, psychological, and even physical abuse. Anybody who tried to get out or tried to have their voice heard was punished. It's scarier than any horror movie I've ever watched.
When you're in that environment, you're cut off. And you're living in all these foreign countries where you're trying to learn the local language. It's a very different environment than how we think of today when we're just sort of gutted with so much information. And so when you isolate people to that extent, you isolate them from their families, you isolate them from work, and you flood them with this one way of thinking.
Every time I think about this call, I just think how evil you could be. How evil really does exist in this world. And sometimes I forget that. David Berg was as evil as it gets.
You had to find so much power within yourself to decide to leave. Can you kind of talk about what brought you there and then what life was like once you did leave Children of God?
How I decided to leave was interesting. It was kind of incremental. When I was 12, my father, having been stripped of his leadership position, was actually shipped away and put into isolation. And then my mother and her 3 kids were shipped off to Thailand. My mother had a nervous breakdown and we ended up in America, and we ended up getting kind of accidentally excommunicated. We were living in a trailer, we couldn't find food, I was like with a can in a parking lot. And so my mother going through that too, that was a very traumatic experience for her, and I think she began to see the cult differently. We lived with my grandmother and I went to school for 6 months. But I actually thought, I like this. Teachers know stuff. I can figure out how to do good on tests and things like that. It was kind of cool. My father eventually came and got us and we went back to the farm. So when we went back, we weren't as in our hearts, I think, in some ways. I also had ended up having a brief period of time when I went to China. And we had to pretend to be normal, because if they found out you were a missionary, you would get kicked out of the country. So having kind of these glimpses of sort of what a kind of normal life was able to open my mind up. Going back into that commune where every movement is ordered, basically, I couldn't see a future for myself. I actually became depressed. And when it just kept going on, I was like, okay, I've got to make a change. So then I had this desire to go to college, and my mother actually supported me in this. It wasn't that I thought the group was wrong, it wasn't that I didn't believe it, because I still didn't really know any different. But this burning desire to learn, I was so hungry for just more than the same old Mo letters rehashed in a different way over and over and over again. I wanted my mind to expand. I had just turned 23 years old when I left the Children of God.
After 40 years of bad press, in 2010, the Family International went through a major restructuring called the Reboot that announced the closure of the majority of their communal living spaces, quote, in order to better achieve our purpose of reaching the world with the gospel message and to allow for greater diversity, end quote. Essentially, the group got with the times and now functions primarily as an online organization. Why are they still a thing?
I don't know.
Why do they get to exist?
I don't know.
Delete the website.
Yeah.
It's been over 50 years of this. And it's still not over.
The version of the Children of God today is a very watered down version, I would say. They went almost mainstream. So a lot of the doctrines that we're talking about, they don't practice or believe today. I think what's difficult for a lot of people is to be able to distinguish between what was good and the things that they appreciated and what was bad. I think it's hard for people who have been so brainwashed to see that clearly. And when you think about some of these people who spent their entire adult lives, from the time they were teenagers in this group, and they sacrificed everything and they gave everything, and they come out and they have no retirement, they own no property, to go back and say, wow, my life was built on this lie, this huge lie, like how difficult would that be?
We might never know what is happening in the digital shadows, but the lasting effects of the trauma and abuse many of the adults and children suffered under decades of Berg's leadership is evident.
So, what has helped you go through the trauma that you went through in the Children of God?
I always felt like I had a strong, direct relationship with God. So often through the trauma, that's the only person that I could turn to was God. And I really believed and had faith that God was there for me and that everything was going to work out. Everyone experiences trauma. It's how you handle it that makes the difference.
I want to give you a hug now. Can we? As we've seen in so many of the cults we've studied so far, what started as a call for those looking for love, community, and freedom was quickly weaponized against them into tools for power and corruption. And the suffering for so many has been immeasurable.
And that concludes another episode of Rise and Fall. Thank you so much, Faith, for sharing your story with us. And to everyone out there, thank you for listening to the stories of the victims who were a part of this cult. And to anyone who is a victim, you are loved, you are cared for, and you are strong. And you deserve the best of everything.
Yeah, we're giving you all